Nvidia has finally started to drop prices on both the RTX 4080 and even the RTX 4090. I'm going to give you guys specific examples. First, it's going to start over in Europe. Look, a viewer of mine even posted this, that the Founders Edition has already seen a price drop. Not only that, they're also reporting Nvidia has already dropped prices on the Founders Edition in the UK. So you're talking about both the 4080 and the 4090. It's really funny that Nvidia said this has nothing to do with AMD's launch, but in my opinion, this is just the start of Nvidia's counterattack against the new AMD GPUs. If you guys watched my video from a few days ago, it all started when Nvidia, December 1st, had one of the biggest drops in the US that we've seen in quite some time. They had a lot of RTX 4080s drop, and I'm not only talking about Micro Center, that people always kind of joke that they don't have one near them, but Micro Center got them as well. We're talking about Best Buy had a drop that was in stock literally for hours, even until the next day. Newegg, ever since that day, has had pretty consistent stock of the RTX 4080. People, when they watch my video, sometimes they'll say, where are you seeing 4080s in stock? Well, look at this. I'm going to pull up my phone right now, and if I type in RTX 4080, there are a few in stock on Newegg. Now it's going to change depending on what sells out. I put in stock sold by Newegg, meaning MSRP retail. I'm not even talking about the GPUs that are, third party that people sell for a much larger price. Here, we're talking about sold directly by Newegg. The two that I see in stock here are two Asus ones, and before they did have a Gigabyte one that was closer to the $1,200. So that shows you they're definitely in stock and they're not really selling that well, which is part of the reason why Nvidia has been dropping the price. So their counterattack against AMD, it probably comes in two waves. First, it's going to be a consistent restocking as we get close to the launch of the 7900 XT and the XTX. And then, of course, the second countermeasure is going to be to lower these prices, which is the topic of today's video. It's really funny that Nvidia said it's not to do with AMD. They can even point to like a million different reasons, such as the currency in Europe and different things of that nature. But you really can't get by the timing of this and how it definitely will affect what's coming up from AMD. Why do people want the AMD GPUs? First, they're priced better than the RTX 4080. That's really simple. It's the next generation GPU. AMD's highest end 7900 XTX has a base MSRP of $999. The 4080 has a base MSRP of $1,199, which is a pretty considerable difference because remember, the MSRP prices, you don't always find them at that exact low price. Often the AIB models, such as the examples I pointed to before, will add maybe even a few $100s on top of that price. So the lower that an MSRP pricing typically is, the lower that we'll see other pricing from typically being inflated. That's why people are very, very excited. It's no doubt that people are very upset at the 4080 price. It's interesting about the 4090, however. If you guys noticed, Nvidia is also lowering the price of the 4090, but this is going to be mainly in Europe. The difference between the US and other countries are pretty big when it comes to the 4090. In the US, it's almost impossible to find a 4090 in stock. They came in rarely, like the last drop had a couple, but much more 4080s. In the rest of the world, however, it's different. Even my viewers always tell me how they see 4090s in stock constantly, but the price is too high. That's really the big difference. So by Nvidia dropping those prices, maybe they're going to sell a few more 4090s overseas as well. At the end of the day, the biggest problem worldwide is still the 4080. Nvidia shipped many less than the 4090, and they're selling many less as well. But it's not only the amount that they shipped. In comparison to the total number, the percentage is lower any way that you slice it. Now, the big deal here is, let's ignore everything else that Nvidia may say. The RTX AMD's GPUs are launching really soon, December 13th. What's the biggest difference between the AMD GPUs that people were looking forward to and the 4080 that people are not looking to buy? It comes down to the price. Let's forget all, camps, Nvidia and AMD for a second. Forget the pricing. If you take an Nvidia GPU like an RTX 4080 and you compare it to an AMD GPU like a 7900 XTX, let's say if they were both the same price, just make it even. You can get both the same price. which one would people typically choose? Of course, it is the Nvidia one, and that's being objective because, first of all, as a piece of hardware, you have to admit the Nvidia is still superior when it comes to GPUs. You can look at it from a general balanced perspective. For example, they're going to have better ray tracing and the rasterization is still really good. The Nvidia GPUs have a lead not only in gaming, but also in content creation, 3D work, machine learning, across the board. The encoders for like video editing, they're generally going to be superior for streaming. You can say objectively that Nvidia GPUs have just better hardware at the end of the day. Not only that, they typically blend it much better as well with the driver support. Nvidia has very good, stable driver support. Of course, they have problems like anybody else, but when they do, they typically seem to fix it pretty quickly, and their drivers are pretty much respected. Now, AMD is definitely a smaller player, but they've been catching up. I don't want to make it seem like AMD's inferior in any way. It's just that their hardware is still playing a bit of catch up. Their rasterization is good, but their ray tracing, it's really not there with the Nvidia GPUs. In terms of content creation, video editing, and rendering, they're typically not on the same level as well. And this is all really objective. You guys can go look at benchmark, and you'll see that on average, Nvidia beats AMD. Of course, AMD does beat Nvidia in some cases, like the 6900 XT did better than the 3090 in some games in rasterization. If you segment it out, you can definitely find cases where that happens. So just to be fair here, where the difference starts is when you bring in the price. Now, if I told you that same Nvidia GPU is $1,500 and the AMD one is $1,000, then you start to think, okay, maybe Nvidia is a little better, but maybe I don't need ray tracing or I don't need this particular feature. I'd rather save the money and buy AMD. That's the biggest selling point here. Unfortunately, that's just how it is. It comes down to the price because objectively, the Nvidia hardware is still a little bit better. So now that I've said that, what's my point here? Let's go back to the subject of the video, Nvidia dropping prices. If that expensive 4080 is all of a sudden not very expensive, let's say if it comes down even closer to the price of a 7900 XTX, Nvidia has just really threw the ball back at AMD's court, and they've really kind of changed the game a little bit because first, 4080 is going to be much more available than other Nvidia GPUs, and second, the hardware is really good. Nobody complained about the 4080 as a GPU. They complained about the price. First of all, the ray tracing is great. The power consumption on the 4080, it's extremely efficient for sort of the performance that it's putting out. And overall, even though it's not close to a 4090 performance-wise, it's still a great GPU. It's just not great at that price. But if Nvidia drops that price low enough and all of a sudden it's right next to the AMD GPUs, you're going to have a lot more people thinking it over because people's main frustration with Nvidia is going to be sort of the pricing that it went up from the $700 3080 to a $1,200 4080. But if it's no longer $1,200 and maybe it's $1,100, maybe it's $1,000 like the 79 XTX, people are going to have to consider the 4080, and that's going to be a big problem for AMD because, like I mentioned, all those reasons why the Nvidia hardware is still objectively better. If both of these GPUs are around the same price and readily available, your justification for getting AMD is going to go down tremendously because on average, the Nvidia GPU may do more for you of what you're after than AMD. Maybe gaming, ray tracing, maybe it's content creation. There's a good chance the Nvidia performance net, if you will catch your use case a lot better than AMD's, which generally work a lot better for traditional gaming, high refresh rate like 1440p. As you get into 4K and you get into ray tracing and you really want to max out that GPU, no doubt that Nvidia still has an advantage there. So that's going to be a key factor, and Nvidia is really aware of this. Now, they can do a couple of other things as well to combat AMD's GPUs. Remember, AMD has significantly less market share and thus less selling through potential across all types of retail channels, which makes a big difference on how consumers interact with the product. You may be much more likely to find these Nvidia GPUs in stock than something like AMD, just because Nvidia just has a much bigger grasp of the market. And that's going to be another way that Nvidia is counterattacking AMD, like with those big restocking and drops that we mentioned earlier. Of course, Nvidia still has another secret weapon after they see what the 7900 XTX can also do. Remember the canceled 4080 12GB? Well, we're seeing some rumors that it's going to be relaunched around January 5th as the 4070 Ti. Now, $899 was a terrible price for that 4080, but if Nvidia is dropping the price on the 4090 and the current 4080, imagine what they can do to the price of that 12GB 4070 Ti. If it comes in cheap enough and the performance isn't that far off from what AMD is offering, a lot of people may actually go to that GPU. Maybe it's like $6 or $799, which is going to undercut AMD's high-end GPUs. And yes, the 4070 Ti is not the same level or tier as something like a 7900 XT, but the 7900 XT also performs worse than the 7900 XTX, making it not really a great value for only $100 less. And it's feasible that in many cases, for the same reasons that I mentioned before, that Nvidia has advantages in hardware, they could also be very attractive for a lot of people at the 4070 Ti level if it comes in at $799, undercutting the 7900 XT. Maybe gaming performance will be similar, and when you throw in ray tracing and other content creation type things to the GPU, people may choose to go for that. Plus, if Nvidia probably has a whole lot of stock of that 4070 Ti sitting around for the last few months, because remember, they were supposed to release it as a 4080, so they probably have a lot of them, so they can flood the market and take away market share from AMD. So Nvidia's strategy, they're really playing it right to AMD with pricing. That's where AMD has attacked Nvidia, and that's where AMD also attacked Intel when they did their Ryzen CPUs the last few years. So definitely a strategy that now Nvidia can throw back in their face. Not to mention RTX 3000 has been selling the stock that they had, even though they're still holding on to a lot of inventory. Situation now is much better, and this is according to Nvidia, than it was the last few months. All right, guys, so do you think that Nvidia pricing these GPUs lower is going to push people away from AMD? Let me know what you think. Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video.